Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Dave Allen, The Analysis of the Text of the Testimony of Flavinium by Josephus on Jesus. He examines the Greek, and he's written a long article/book, so to speak, if you will, and it will be published in the Journal of Higher Criticism with Dr. Robert McNair Price. So be on the lookout for that material. I will be reading large portions of this book that he is bringing out, but I want you to consider that the Testimonium Flavinium may not be ex nihilo a interpolation by Christians. What if there was a negative one? What if there was one prior to the one that we have now that said something completely different? Well, there are many scholars out there that propose such a theory. And Dave Allen is on the side of this. He does think there was a historical Jesus, but this kind of Jesus was radically different than what Christians will tell you. Far different than this pacifistic, nice, kind, loving Jew. He was more radical than that. He was more nationalistic than that. He was more Israelite-focused than that. In fact, we don't even know if he would have been okay with such a Gentile notion that Paul proposes. With that being said, today, I hope you'll take the time to listen, because this is going to be a complicated video. But if you have an open mind and consider the evidence, this might radically change your perception on who Jesus, the man who's spoken of in the New Testament, may have ever been, if he was historical. And there is about this time a certain man, a sophist, an agitator. He was one who wrought surprising feats, a teacher of men who revered him with pleasure. Many of the Judeans and also many of the Galilean element he led to himself. He was believed to be a king, for he opposed paying the tax to Caesar. Becoming alarmed that the eloquence that had so great an effect on people might lead to some form of sedition. And when on the accusation of the first men among us, Pilate condemned him to be crucified. Many of his followers, the Galileans and Judeans, were slain, and thus checked for the moment. The movement again broke out with great abundance, when it was believed he appeared to them alive. Those that followed him at first did not cease to revere him. Their leader in sedition and this tribe has still, to this day, not disappeared. Proposed original of Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 3. What the version we have today that is not in the Slavonic version goes something like this. And there is about this time Jesus, a wise man, if indeed it is necessary to say that he is a man. He was one who wrought surprising feats, a teacher of men who received true things with pleasure. And many Jews, and also many of the Greek element, he led to himself. He was the Christ. And when on the accusation of the first men among us, Pilate had condemned him to the cross. Those who had first loved him did not cease, for he appeared to them on the third day, living again. The divine prophets have said both these things and myriads of other wonders concerning him, and even until now, the tribe of Christians named from this man has not been lacking. In this phrase, Dave Allen brackets the reasoning behind the execution of such a man. In the first line of the Testimony of Flavinium, there is about this time Jesus, a wise man. And here's the proposed change. And there is about this time a certain man, a sophist and agitator. Now here are the reasons why this change, if we were going to try and find what the original was, someone like Robert Eisler proposed. For the first word in the passage, there arose, Robert Eisler has observed the verb genitai does, however, occur quite frequently in Josephus, particularly at the beginning of paragraphs, but the subject of the sentence is then almost without exception a word such as tamut, or rebellion, or trouble, or some such term. He then goes on to give many examples of this, as the passage before and after the Testimonium Flavinium are negative, describing tumults, and as Eisler observed that many a time Josephus often put in a word describing a tumultuous situation, I have included the word agitator in the reconstruction. The interpolation of the Testimonium Flavinium and Slavonic Josephus war also does not name Jesus in the passage, but refers to him as there appeared a certain man. Get that. In the Slavonic version, it's also an interpolation, but he does not mention Jesus by name. It is not unusual for Josephus not to know the name of a popular messianic figure. Case in mind is the Egyptian, who featured in both Antiquities and War, yet he could only call him the Egyptian. Same goes for the Samaritan, Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 5. There is a variant found in one of the manuscripts, Codex A of Eusebius, Ecclesiastical History. This reading offers the pronoun, referring to a certain Jesus. I have used this word certain in the reconstruction, but instead of a certain Jesus, I have said a certain man. This derogatory expression argues against the Testimonium Flavinium being made of whole cloth, ex nihilo. Chapter 4. On use of the TF by anti-Christian polemics, written by Dave Allen. And after such statements, showing his ignorance even of the number of the apostles, he proceeds thus: Jesus having gathered around him 10 or 11 persons of notorious character, the very wickedest of tax collectors and sailors, fled in company with them from place to place, and obtained his living in a shameful and important manner. Let us, to be the best of our power, see what truth there is in such a statement. It is manifest to us all who possess the gospel narratives, which Celsus does not appear to even have read. Origen complained about what Celsus said in his book, The True Doctrine, as quoted in Contra Celsum 1:62. From this passage, it shows that Celsus could have gotten his information from somewhere else, other than the Gospels. He may have had a disapproving look at Christian literature, but he had access to other sources on the Christians that I will examine here. I suspect many of these anti-Christian pagans, preserved in the apologetics of church fathers, made use of the original negative TF before Christians had the power to change the wordings of the original books. It was Robert Eisler in his book, The Messiah, Jesus, and John the Baptist, that suggested the opponents of Justin Martyr and Origen made use of the original TF, therefore making them a pre-Eusebian witness of the TF. Also, another German scholar, Franz Dorseif, I think I'm saying that correct, in his book, it's his book about Luke and Josephus and Tacitus. He has said that Tacitus also made use of the negative TF, original TF. It has been suggested that Tacitus got his information about Christians from his friend Pliny the Younger. This may be true, but the information Tacitus has about Christians is more that Pliny would have given him and matches the TF on 4 points. It is probable that Tacitus would have received his information from both Pliny and a negative TF. In case you're wondering what a negative TF is, an original TF that does not look like the one we have today. Not something positive on the character that Christians worship today. They use this original Testimonium Flavinium before it mentioned Christ or Christians. The original TF was about Jesus and his movement. It was G.A. Wells that argued that the sources for Tacitus were not independent and therefore do not corroborate Paul's epistles. In this chapter, I argue that all the anti-Christian polemic worked off the original TF, and that Josephus got his information from imperial or more local army records independent of Christians. For Josephus was on very good terms with Tacitus and imperial secretary Epiphanes. Both Tacitus and Lucian are not aware of Jesus' name, Tacitus calling him Christos, whereas Lucian calls him the crucified sophist. Calling him a sophist suggests Lucian is drawing off a different source than the Gospels, such as the original TF, that I have reconstructed in the previous chapter. As discussed in chapter 4, the opponents of the church father apologist all seem to be working off an original TF. Example, Justin Martyr answers his opponent, he was no sophist, but his word was the power of God. In 1 Apologies and on. Justin's interlocutor has got his charge that Jesus was described as a sophist, probably information that was contained in the TF. Judas the Galilean was also described as a sophist in Josephus' works. Celsus is under the impression that Jesus was the leader of a seditious movement as described by Origen. Again, Celsus proceeds, if you should tell them that Jesus is not the Son of God, but that God is the Father of all, and that he alone ought to be truly worshipped, they would not consent to discontinue their worship of him who is their leader in the sedition. Origen denies that Celsus has just said by adding the following, Jesus is then not the leader of any seditious movement, but the promoter of peace, contra Celsum 8:14. Here are some more examples that will build a picture of how the anti-Christian polemics viewed the Jesus movements. That a man fastened to a cross on account of his crimes is worshipped by Christians, for they believe not only that he was innocent, but with reason that he was God. But on the other hand, the heathens invoke the divine powers of kings raised into gods by themselves. They pray to images and beseech their guinea. Manicius Felix, Octavius. And they worship what they deserve, Manicius Felix. That Christ, driven out by the Jews, gathered a band of 900 men and committed acts of brigandage. In the next passage quoted in full below, Celsus makes the following claims, that Christ and members of his church have been put to death in a way appropriate to robbers, and Celsus also asks, what makes the two robbers crucified with Jesus any different from Jesus? Celsus in the next place says, with indescribable silliness, if, after inventing defenses which are absurd, and by which you were ridiculously deluded, you imagine that you really make a good defense? What prevents you from regarding those other individuals who have been condemned and have died a miserable death as greater and more divine messengers of heaven than Jesus? Now, that manifestly and clearly there is no similarity between Jesus, who suffered what is described, and those who have died a wretched death on account of their sorcery, or whatever else be the charge against them. It is patent to everyone, for no one can point to any facts or any acts of a sorcerer which turned away souls from the practice of the many sins which prevail among men, and from the flood of wickedness in the world. But since this Jew of Celsus compares him to robbers, and says that any similarly shameless fellow might be able to say regarding even a robber and murderer whom punishment had overtaken, that such a one was not a robber, but a god, because he predicted to his fellow robbers that he would suffer such punishment as he actually did suffer, it might in first place be answered that it is not because he predicted that he would suffer such things that we entertain those opinions regarding Jesus, which lead us to have confidence in him, as one who has come down to us from God. And in the second place, we assert that this very comparison has been somehow foretold in the Gospels. Since God was numbered with the transgressors by wicked men, who desired rather a murderer, one who for sedition and murder has been cast into prison to be released unto them, and Jesus to be crucified, and who crucified him between two robbers. Jesus, indeed, is ever crucified with robbers among his genuine disciples and witnesses to the truth, and suffers the same condemnation which they do among men. And we say that if those persons have any resemblance to robbers, who on account of their piety towards God suffer all kinds of injury and death, that they may keep it pure and unstained, according to the teaching of Jesus, when it is clear also that Jesus, the author of such teaching, is with good reason compared by Celsus to the captain of a band of robbers. But neither was he who died for the common good of mankind, nor they who suffered because of their religion, and alone all men who were persecuted because of what appeared to them the right way of honoring God, put to death in accordance with justice. Nor was Jesus persecuted without the charge of impiety being incurred by his persecutors. Origen, Contra Celsum 2:44. Jesus fits the mold of other self-styled prophets who rose up against Roman maladministration, those such as Theodus, who proclaimed that he would part the Jordan, the Egyptian who said the walls of Jerusalem would come tumbling down, or the Samaritan who promised to show the crowds sacred vessels which were buried at Mount Gerizim, where Moses had deposited them, all discussed in chapter 7, are all similar Joshua-type movements to the Jesus movement. Jesus' opponents see him as a magician of some sort. All these self-styled prophets gathered crowds, promised to overthrow the Romans with God's intervention. Jesus, too, was seen to perform wonders, all putting him in the same comparative type as these religious resistant leaders. Was Christ not a magician? But lest any one should meet us with the question, what should prevent that he, whom we call Christ, being a man born of men, performed what we call his mighty works by magical art, and by this appeared to be the Son of God? We will now offer proof, not trusting mere assertions, but being of necessity persuaded by those who prophesied of him before these things came to pass. For with our own eyes we behold things that have happened and are happening just as they were predicted, and this will, we think, appear even to you the strongest and truest evidence. Justin Martyr, 1 Apology. And from Tertullian, as then under the force of their prejudgment, they had convinced themselves from his lowly guise that Christ was no more than man, it followed from that, as a necessary consequence, that they should hold him a magician from the powers which he displayed. Tertullian, Apology. And from Celsus, continuing to pour abuse upon Jesus as one who, on account of his impiety and wicked opinions, was, so to speak, hated by God, he asserts that these tenets of his were those of a wicked and God-hated sorcerer. Origen, Contra Celsum 1:71. The anti-Christian polemic comes close to recovering the historical Jesus. It shows how a messianic title, going back to the historic Jesus as seen from these three ancient quotes, John 6:15, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Antiquities 17:10-8, and now Judea was full of robberies, and as the several companies of seditious light upon any one of them to heed them, he was created a king immediately in order to do mischief to the public. Against Celsus 3:7, that in the days of Jesus, others who were Jews rebelled against the Jewish state and became his followers. Let us now look at more evidence from Tacitus. The manuscript tradition for Annals is incomplete, ending around 66 AD, well before resolution of the Jewish revolt and the destruction of Jerusalem. Tacitus' Histories is likewise incomplete, ending in early 70 AD, when it is believed to have recorded events through to 96 AD. Back in 1861, Jacob B. Rays noticed that Sulpicius Severus a Christian writer born in the mid-4th century, used Tacitus as a source in his best-known work, Chronicle or Sacred History. Written in 403 AD, James D. Dunn suggests that the citation may come from the lost portion Annals, noting that it breaks off in Book 16, when his account had reached the year 66 before the outbreak of the Jewish War. I go with Louis Feldman, myself, where he says most scholars have adopted the suggestion of Bernays that Sulpicius' source was none other than a lost portion of Tacitus' histories. The gap in Tacitus' histories is thought to be preserved in Sulpicius Severus, Chronica 230, 6-7. This piece that is preserved is known as Tacitus Fragment 2. Laporte makes the case in his paper that Sulpicius used Tacitus as a source. Evidence takes the form of the discovery of a significant statistical relationship among the following three words. The metaphor, stirps, branch, descendants, used to describe the Christian in fragment, and Nazarene, describing the New Testament sect associated with Vax, the connecting link among also, as well as the common source for the three words listed above, appears to be in Hebrew Nestor branch, descendants apparently influenced by Isaiah 11:1, which both translate into stirps. The present study, Laporte's paper, demonstrates that Fragment 2 is a primary historical source that in all probability correctly identifies Fragment 2, Christiani, as the Latin name for a group of major participants in the first Jewish revolts against Rome of 66 to 73 CE. In addition, we shall see that the Hebrew name for at least a portion, if not all of this group, was probably Netzarim, Nazarenes. Chronicle 2, 30, 6-7. It is reported that Titus first deliberated by summoning a council of war as to whether to destroy a temple of such workmanship, for it seemed proper to some that a consecrated temple, distinguished above all that is human, should not be destroyed, as it would serve as a witness to a Roman moderation, whereas its destruction would represent a perpetual brand of cruelty. In 2:30, verse 7. But others, on the contrary, disagreed, including Titus himself. They argued that the destruction of the temple was a number one priority in order to destroy completely the religion. Perseverus, Tacitus, or another classical author, would have used the word superstition. Compare History 5:8 and Annals 1544. Of the Jews and the Christiani. For although these religions, superstitions, are conflicting, they nevertheless developed from the same origins. The Christiani arose from the Jews. With the root removed, the branch, or stirps, is easily killed. Josephus gives a parallel of this account in War 6:23. But this is a biased account in favor of Titus. Severus has probably preserved Tacitus' less biased account. Laporte doesn't think the Christians in Tacitus are the same Christians as Paul's Christians, yet they are. No Christian can accept a rebellious beginning, and as such, many lacunae exist. I hope I'm saying that correct, such as the Caligula-Claudius gap in the Annals that originally described them as rebels. Edwin Johnson has said in his book, I think he's saying Antiquities, Mater, that the Romans used the term Christiani as the name for Jewish messianist. He brilliantly explains that Roman commentators of the time simply named any messianic Jews as Christiani. The passage above also explains why the sectarian group at Qumran were destroyed after the Roman-Jewish War. All messianists who were so troublesome during the war were destroyed by the Romans. This is where Laporte has gone wrong, thinking he was commenting on the actual sect instead of just all Jewish messianists in general. This in turn also suggests that the Jesus messianic group had rebellious beginnings. Laporte is right in seeing how these Roman commentators describing these Messianic Jews, it should be noted that Tacitus' description in Annals 1544 of the Christiani superstition as dangerous, sinister, and evil, etc., and Suetonius' portrayal of the Christiani in Nero 16:2 as following: a new and dangerous superstition. Pliny the Younger, who was on about the actual Jesus sect, accuses them of being infected by this contagious superstition. This, of course, makes sense of Suetonius' so-called mention of Jews in Life of Claudius 25:5 about a Christos that got thrown out of Rome during the reign of Claudius. He did not mean the Jesus movement, as some apologist scholars equate this Christos, a common slave name, with Christ, but Jewish messianism in general. Jesus would hardly be living in Rome in 49 CE. Jewish messianism and religio-political revolt go hand in hand. There were other expulsions of Jews reported 139 BCE and 19 CE, as reported in Tiberius 36. Quote, he abolished foreign cults in Rome, particularly the Egyptian and Jewish, forcing all citizens who had embraced these superstitions to burn their religious vestments and other accessories. End quote. This makes more sense, as Jesus movements were hardly in Rome during the reign of Claudius. Acts 18:2, where Paul is said to have met two of these expelled Messianic Jews. Acts associating with these religious, political, rebellious types just shows the common traits between early Christianity and rebellious Jewish messianists. As Edwin Johnson comments, Tacitus could have known nothing of the destruction between believers in a Messiah and believers in a Messiah Jesus. In writing of the event of the year 70, he enables us to understand how messianic expectation shaped itself to the thought of a Roman. And our explanation then of the passage in Tacitus is that the term Christiani had for him a value altogether different from that which it has long borne for us, and the history of the world since that great messianic illusions faded. Messianists, who were inflamed with those ardent and passionately confident hopes of the downfall of the Roman Empire and of the establishment of a kingdom of Haggai and the elect, which are reflected in the book of Enoch and the Apocalypse, this, of course, shows that Roman commentators did not mean what we think they meant when they used the term Christiani. They did not mean Christianity, but Jewish messianism. And the type they meant was the troublesome type, the type that gave them so much trouble during the Roman-Jewish War. Later, the Christian movement adopted this term in the 2nd century, but were originally known as the Nazareans. Tacitus omits the name Jesus. So if he was using my reconstructed TF, this would be consistent, as Josephus, we know through textual criticism, did not seem to know Jesus' name either. Helen Bond, in her latest book, The First Biography of Jesus, says that the Gospel of Mark accounts for the air of persecution that hangs so heavily over this work. Mark 4:17, 8:34, 10:37 through 40, and 13:9 through 13. Persecution that broke out brutally and unexpectedly under Nero in 65 CE, and might well have continued to threaten the community of Christ followers after the war. A knowledge of the Flavian triumph celebrated in Rome in 71 might also explain the anti-triumph motif that several scholars have detected in Mark's account of the crucifixion. Josephus' sources. Some of the well-known figures that failed to get a mention in Josephus' first book, War, made it into his later book, Antiquities. These figures were not major players in the lead-up into the Roman-Jewish War in 66 to 70 CE. By the time Josephus was writing Antiquities, these same figures that were not thought of offhand were now included by Josephus, who had by then full access to the imperial records. Josephus was very good friends with Titus and made full use of the imperial secretary Epaphroditus. The level of detail that Josephus knew of Caligula's assassination, the plot and its aftermath, could have only been known from imperial records. This is an advantage that Josephus had over even other eminent Roman historians such as Tacitus, who claimed he did not have access to imperial records, Histories 440. Vance Vorst argued that Tacitus did not get his information from Christians, as can be seen for his contempt for Christians. He also did not know Jesus' name. Tacitus, using my reconstructed TF, would easily explain this. Van Vorst has suggested that Tacitus could have gotten his information about Christians and Nero's fire from archives of the Senate. One such figure, the Samaritan, who only got mentioned in Josephus' second book, Antiquities, would have used such records as Acta Pilatae as a source. Another similar figure where Josephus would not have thought of while composing wars was Jesus the Nazarene. And here too, Josephus would have had to go to the Acta Pilatae for his information. By the time the church fathers were writing, they acknowledged the Acta Pilatae, but made up completely what was in them. They would not have had access to these and just made incredible claims that Pilate was reporting the divinity of Jesus and that he had resurrected. Martyr 1 Apology 35, Tertullian Apology 521. The anti-Christian polemics also reworked the real Acta Pilatae, making Eusebius comment that these Acta Pilatae reported by anti-Christian pagans were forged for their propaganda. These anti-Christian pagans would have worked from their original Actae Pilatae to create their particular polemics. What we have now is Christian Acts of Pilate, known as the Gospel of Nicodemus, a pious forgery to counteract what was the original reworked Acts Pilate, but now destroyed. These were seen as a polemic against Acts of Pilate. So the stories of the Gospels were transposed onto the new Acts of Pilate so that it was thoroughly reworked. Even though thoroughly reworked, there is still evidence of the previous Acts of Pilate released by Emperor Maximum that is contained in the Gospel of Nicodemus. Passages such as where Pilate informs the Jews that Jesus heals by the god of Asclepius. Pilate saith, "And what things are they that he doeth, and would destroy the law?" The Jews say, "We have had a law. We have a law that we should not heal any man on the Sabbath. But this man of his evil deeds hath healed the lame and the bent, the withered and the blind, and the paralytic, the dumb, and them that were possessed on the Sabbath day." Pilate saith unto them, "By what evil deeds?" They say unto him, "He is a sorcerer, and by Beelzebub, the prince of the devils, he casteth them out, devils, and they are all subject unto him." Pilate saith unto them, "This is not to cast out devils by an unclean spirit, but by the god Asclepius." It shows even the Christianizing of the Acts of Pilate still left in some of the pagan bits. Thus, it looks like the Maximum Acts of Pilate rewritten. We saw the same thing happen in regard to the TF. The Emmaus narrative in Luke was used in the reworking and original negative TF. See chapter 4. So to sum up for Josephus, to include the minor figures in his later book, Antiquities, would have had to consult the imperial records. Being the Flavian footstool, he would have had full access to these. For such minor figures as the Samaritan or Jesus the Nazarene, he would have had to consult the Acts of Pilate, no longer existing. The early church fathers acknowledged the Acts of Pilate, but made up what was in them. Meanwhile, the anti-Christian polemics made use of their version of Acts of Pilate, to which Eusebius complained and protested. It was from the time of Eusebius that Christians had full power of the books and must have destroyed these damaging Acts of Pilate. A new counter-forgery, Acts of Pilate, Gospel of Nicodemus, was composed as a counter-narrative. It is suspected they simply reworked the pagan Acts of Pilate. In turn, the pagan Acts of Pilate would have reworked the original Acts of Pilate. It was the original Actae Pilatae that Josephus would have made use of in composing his history of it for Antiquities. This would argue for an independent source for Christianity. This puts Jesus' historicity on the same level as all those other messianic figures found in Josephus' works. I think it is very plausible there was an original TF that described Jesus as a seditious leader, as attested in the anti-Christian polemic. This is what Eusebius was covering up. This is the reason for the interpolation. Paul attests the crucifixion. Granted, he doesn't attest under Pilate, as Wheely proved Josephus' passage as having existed, previous chapter. Even if we can't use the reconstruction as evidence, we can use the fact that it existed as a negative original. Even without reconstruction, it is in the middle of the Pilate passages, and therefore it can be used for crucifixion under Pilate. I believe Josephus got his information from other than Christians, just like he probably got his information from other than Samaritans about the Samaritan. Josephus was very good friends with Titus and had the full use of the imperial secretary Epaphroditus. Christians, Samaritans, Sicarii, or any other such messianic group were well below Josephus' feet. His consultations would have been the records. These anti-Christian polemics of Jesus being a seditious leader can even be seen in the Gospel of Luke. As we see in Luke 23, Jesus was considered dangerous enough to raise a sedition. Luke 23, verses 2 through 3. The Sanhedrin says to Pilate, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payments of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. In Luke 23:14, Pilate said, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion." As was common for many messianic leaders, see next chapter, to raise a crowd was a dangerous occupation and usually would end up getting you executed. This is all reflected in the Gospel of John. John 11:47 through 50. Then the chief priest and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." I suppose Jesus, being a small-time resistor, temple cleansing, could see the writing on the wall. Rather than having it planned, I see Jesus' movement as reactionary, as he lived in bad times. I'm not placing any judgment value on the term seditious leader. Jesus lived during very bad times. If you study the position of the Testimonium Flavinium, a load of unarmed Jews were slaughtered by Pilate's men. In modern times, U2 sang a song, "Sunday, Bloody Sunday," about the killing of a load of unarmed Irish protesters, which started a 30-year guerrilla war. I see the Jesus movement as the same type of reactionary resistant movement, where Jesus got crucified for sedition, King of the Jews. The kiss of Judas is only the dramatic storytelling of the Gospels. The only dealings the Roman administration would have had with a movement like Jesus' movement is through the payment of informers. Whether Judas is a literary invention or not, that is not what he represents. Many scholars today think that Iscariot means man of the Kerioth, as the Is in Hebrew means Ish, implying Judas was Keriothish. Given there was no village, Kerioth, at the time of Jesus, it is more likely that this is a Greek rendering of the Sicarii, an assassin group who had small daggers under their clothing on the pretense of a sacrifice, this implying the name meaning man of the daggers. As discussed below, many more disciples had descriptive names associated with the zealots. There are many hints in the Gospels that some of Jesus' followers were zealot-resistant types. As Carmichael said, the echoes of the zealots, for instance, see page 37, is arresting. One Simon the Cananean, in the list of the 12 appointed by Jesus, is mentioned, Mark 3:18. The two sons of Zabdi, John and Jacob, are called sons of rage, echoing the violence associated with the kingdom of God activist. Also, Simon the Rock is called Barion, as though it meant Bar Yonah, or son of Yonah, but Barion meant rebel, outlaw, a political or social outcast living on the outside, away from the settled areas controlled by the state. I'll unpack all these points raised above. Simon Cananean, Mark 3:18, reference Matthew 10:4. Has Simon Cananaean as one of the disciples? The Hebrew word kana means zealot, and thus modern translations now translate it as Simon the Zealot. Luke 6:15, Acts 1:13 had him as Simon the Zealot all along. Sons of Zebedee. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were known as Boanerges, Aramaic for sons of thunder. This name was a reflection of their violence seen in Luke 9:53-56. Simon the Rock. Marcus Bacchimule asks in his paper, was Simon Peter a son of Jonah or a terrorist? The Greek for Simon's name is clumsy in Matthew 16:17. Shimon, Simon, is Hebrew, Bar is Aramaic for son, and Jonah is Greek form of the Hebrew name Yonah. However, in the Greek text, the name reads as Bar-Yonah. We know this word has a connotation for outlaws from the Talmud. This word has no resonance in Greek. It has a precise meaning in Aramaic, fugitive or outlaw. In the Talmud, Bar-Yonah and its plural, Barionim, are used to describe the zealots who fought against Rome. So to sum up, we see the anti-Christian polemics having an independent source to the Gospels. That source, I suspect, was the original TF. Josephus, I suspect, got his information from imperial records as he was well in with Titus. The original TF was the corroborating evidence for Jesus before it was overwritten. This puts Jesus on the same level of historicity as all those other messianic figures found in Josephus' works. Nazareth, Nazarene question. The most convincing aspect of Jesus' historicity is that he belonged to a messianic group of Nazarenes, which the later strata of the New Testament literature try to cover up by saying Jesus was from Nazareth. As Bruce Chilton noticed in the Gospels handling of the term Nazarene, but more is going on here. Jesus is rarely called of Nazareth or from Nazareth. He is usually called Nazarene or Nazarene. Why the adjective and why the uncertainty in spelling? The Septuagint shows us that there were many different transliterations of the Nazarite that reflect uncertainty as to how to convey the term in Greek. Some of the variants are in fact very close to what we find used to describe Jesus in the Gospels. There are two possible origins for the word Nazarene. Either explanation would denote a sect as opposed to a geographical location as the origin. First explanation was given by J.S. Kennard, who sees Nazarites as a title for the separated coming from Numbers 6. This would be true if the derivation of Nazarene had the Aramaic and Hebrew base, NTZR, Natsar, meaning consecrated or set apart. So this also means to keep watch or guard, with the term Nazarite, the Greek letter zeta, is rendering the Hebrew letter zayin, or zayin. So the base is Nazir, as opposed to Natsar for Nazarene, where confusing the same Greek letter zeta rendering the Hebrew letter tazadi. The phrase keepers of the covenant or guardians of the covenant, Natsarim Habrit, appears repeatedly as a sectarian name in the Dead Sea Scrolls. In Aramaic, the collective plural word for the keepers, as in jailkeeper or guardian, is Natsarim. All variant transliterations of Nun, Sadi, Resh, Mem compare Hebrew Shamri, a root word for Samaritans. The New Testament book of Acts admits that this was a sectarian name, Nazareus, with the omega in Greek, showing it was derived from Aramaic, Nazarim, and not from the place name Nazareth. The second, and I think is more likely explanation for the origin of the word Nazarene, is given by Lapo, who sees the name derived from this Jewish messianic group comes from Isaiah 11:1, which connects the Hebrew word netzer, branch, to the Greek transliterated word Nazarene. This word netzer comes from the exact same Hebrew base for keepers as discussed above. Hebrew did not have vowels, so words could only be interpreted from their context. Netzer, branch, was used as a term for the royal descendants of the King David, so important to all Jewish messianic groups. For me, this is the more probable origin of the word Nazarene, as the messianism Jewish groups claimed descendant from the house of David, Isaiah 11:1, used Netzer to refer to a Messiah. William Smith has seen this term as belonging to earlier strata of the New Testament. Nazarene, this occurs repeatedly in apparently the oldest layers of the gospel story, without any suggestion of tendency, especially in Acts, and more than all, it is used in the plural as the name of the new religionist, Acts 24:5. Tertullius described Paul as a ringleader of the heresy of the Nazarenes. It seems impossible that this name should have become their vulgar designation, unless it had been a very early and important designation. In Mark, the epithet that is so distinctive that it is put in the mouth of the maid as the name of the arrested one. Thou also wast with the Nazarene Jesus, Mark 14:67. All this indicates that this epithet was, from the start, highly distinctive and familiar, a name in itself which would be passing strange if it was indeed derived from the most obscure village otherwise known. Of course, the Gospel of Mark suggests Capernaum as Jesus' hometown and only once mentions Nazareth at 1:19, an interpolation as discussed below. Capernaum was really the hometown of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. Mark 2:1, when Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it became known that he was at home. Mark 2:15, while he was at table in his house. Mark 3:20, he came home. Dr. Robert McNair Price has seen the reason for this cover-up and why the Gospel of Matthew did cover it up, a reason why Jesus' epithet was changed. Christians could no longer imagine their Lord had himself been simply a believer, i.e., a Nazarene, like themselves. So they inferred that his famous epithet that had denoted he had held from Nazareth. Schoenfeld saw the main reason for this change. The name he bears, Jesus the Nazarene, has northern sectarian implications. A cunning cover-up for the Nazarite is to make him from Nazareth. Mark 1:9 does not say Jesus from Nazareth, only that he walked from there. In fact, his hometown in Mark is Capernaum. Mark 2:1. Both Luke and Matthew, copying an earlier MSS of Mark, do not have Nazareth. As Turton says, Mark 1:9 reference to Nazareth does not appear in the parallel passages in Matthew or Luke. In Luke, Jesus goes to the baptism from Galilee, but there is no Nazareth. Luke's evidence is even more compelling, given according to Ehrman that the birth narratives, chapter 1 and 2, are later additions to Luke. Therefore, Luke had not already introduced Jesus as being from Nazareth. Turton goes on to say this is the only use of the word Nazareth in Mark. All other usages are a Greek word, Nazarenos, generally translated as Nazarene. Nazarene can mean either a sectarian designation or of the location of Nazara, but it cannot mean of Nazareth. As Carrier noted, Dr. Richard Carrier noted, there is no good reason Jesus was called a Nazarene. Matthew 26:71, Luke 18:37, John 18:5-7, and 19:19. And his followers, Nazarenes, other than that, this term originally was unconnected with Nazareth, and originally was a sect. Nazareos has no grammatical connection to Nazar, Nazareth, Nazareth. Nazor and Nazar are completely different roots. Matthew knows no other spelling than Nazorios, and he was using Mark as a source. Matthew tries to cover up Jesus' association with some pre-Christian insurrectionist sect of Nazareans, but has retained the use of the term in his gospel, luckily for us. He can do this as he has redefined the term to mean it has somebody coming from Nazareth. Therefore, he didn't have to stop using the term Nazareos. He does it in the verse here, Matthew 2:22-23. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in the town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called Nazarene. The reason he assigns is unreal. It is not found anywhere in the Tanakh that through the prophets he shall be called Nazarene. As we have seen, Matthew is downplaying Jewish messianism and downplaying the bad associated connotation of the term Nazarene. He redefines the origin of the term to that of a person coming from Nazareth. This leads to the further puzzling question. If Jesus, as the Gospels say, chose Peter as the leader of the church, why were the Nazarenes after Jesus' death led not by Peter, but by James, a person who's not even mentioned in the Gospels as a follower of Jesus in his lifetime? This is the kind of contradiction that, if logically considered, can lead us to the true picture of the history of Jesus' movement in Jerusalem, as opposed to the picture which the church, or the later church, wished to propagate. As an interesting side note, the original version of the story looks like it didn't have Nazareth. Something happened in Capernaum first, and Mark still retains mention of it. As for the topography, another clue Nazareth originally had nothing to do with any of the first story is held in Luke. The cliff works better at Sepphoris. There is a tradition in the Talmud of Jesus preaching in the streets of Sepphoris, Babylonian Avodah Zarah. See chapter 10. It doesn't work for the hills of Nazareth, Luke 4:20-27. The translation of Nazarene, Natsorian, are the same as the translations for the Samaritans. Samaritan in Hebrew, that's a transliteration, Shamarim, guardians, keepers, watchers of the Torah. We have another interesting similar sect operating around Samaria and not Judah, that of the Mandeans and the descendants of John the Baptist group. This all plays in well with the propaganda of the Good Samaritan in Luke's Gospel. It's worth ending this chapter with a quote from Dr. Robert McNair Price's 27. Despite the rendering of the many English Bible translations, Jesus is very seldom called Jesus from Nazareth in the Gospels. Mark calls him Jesus the Nazarene, as does Luke twice, in Mark 1:24, 10:47, 14:67, 16:6, Luke 4:34, 24:9. While Matthew, John, and Acts always call him Jesus the Nazorian, Matthew 26:71, John 18:7, 19:19, Acts 2:22, 3:6, 4:10, 6:14, 22:8, 26:9. With Luke using this epithet once, Luke 18:37. The Bartimaeus episode, where he has placed Mark's Nazarene with it, the difference between Nazarene and Nazorian does give us reason to suspect that the familiar epithet does not, after all, denote Jesus hailing from the village called Nazareth. The Nazarene would imply that, but not the Nazorian. That seems to be a sect name equivalent to the Essene or the Hasid. EPIPHANIUS, an early Christian cataloger of heresies, mentions a pre-Christian sect called the Nazareans, their name meaning the keepers of the Torah, or possibly the secrets. See Mark 4:11. To you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God, but to those outside all is by way of a parable. These Nazareans were the heirs, supposedly, of the neo-primitivist sect of the RECHABITES, descending from the times of Jeremiah 35, 1-10. They were rather like gypsies, itinerant carpenters. Nazorian occurs once unambiguously in the New Testament itself as a sect designation in Acts 24:5. A ringleader of the sect of the Nazareans. It should be clear that such a scenario, while quite naturally historically, is offensive to the Christological beliefs of some, since it presupposes Jesus was a disciple, that he needed to learn religion. How could that be if he were the incarnate Son of God? Harold Bloom, The Anxiety of Influence, Oxford University Press, 1997, describes the anxiety of influence as the reluctance to acknowledge the degree to which one's distinctives are owned to one's predecessors. And then he gives many sources at the end of his chapter. There's a lot there, ladies and gentlemen, and this is all based off of the Negative Testimonium Flavinium, the TF. And there are many references that are really strange. And I scratch my head with good friends like James Stevens Valiant, Robert M. Price. I talk to him personally all the time about this historical Jesus, and he wrestles in his mind and says this would be the best arguments for the historical Jesus. There are a lot of strange messianic extremist, if you will, what we would call today groups who believed their Messiah was truly coming back soon and that he would bring the end, an apocalyptic, if you will, end, that they were going to defeat the enemies of God. And is Jesus one of these? Is Jesus part of one of these groups? Did Josephus not know his name like he didn't know the Egyptian or the Samaritan? And what if he is reconstructing, or to some degree there is an original Testimonium Flavinium where that's located, where it was negative? Why are all these pagans coming up with these ideas when they're talking against Justin Martyr and Origen? The arguments from Celsus and such, looking at the historians, Tacitus and Suetonius and Pliny, it just makes me wonder, is there something being painted over? We know Christians, and when the mythicists argue for the non-historicity of Jesus, we know that Christians didn't have what we have as the Testimonium Flavinium prior to Eusebius, or in that area of time, because they would have used this as an argument against those, as a polemic, if you will. The people arguing, like Celsus, they would have referenced this. So I wonder if they kept getting badgered with this location of this reference, and people saw it, and finally when they had the power, like Eusebius, they saw this and said, we can't keep getting badgered with this, our Lord being a sophist, our Lord being this man of sedition and whatnot. We need to remove this and take this man and make him into what we believe him to be. I mean, we know cognitive dissonance plays a hard role when you believe in things. So thank you for taking this much time to listen to this. I'm sorry if I mispronounce certain names. I'm learning. I'm going to figure these names out. I'm no scholar, but Dave Allen's a good friend of mine, and he believes there was a historical Jesus. Dr. Price is a great friend of mine, and he believes there wasn't, or most likely that there wasn't, or we don't have good evidence to believe that there was. This is really a good wrestling match in my mind, listening to his paper here. You guys will find in the Journal of Higher Criticism in the months to come. And when it gets released, I will stick it down in the description of this video. So right now it will be absent, but maybe by the time you see this clip, it'll be there. And I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of my conversation with Dave Allen. Please bear with him. He has a Southern Irish accent from the Southern Ireland, and it's a strong accent, so it's very hard to understand what he articulates in some places. I hope you can keep up with this. Thank you, Dave Allen, for letting me read from your work, and thank you, Dr. Price, for allowing me to read something that will be shown in the Journal of Higher Criticism in days to come. Don't forget, we are MythVision. Dave Allen joining me here at MythVision. Dave, where are you from? Where is your accent?
This is south of Ireland, so a place called Cork in Ireland. That's nice. Where I'm from. Yeah.
Okay, what is the name of your book?
It's just a patosis of a king messiah.
Okay,
but it's kind of an awkward name. I might have to change it because I just want ordinary people to read it. And maybe that, now that I just said the name out, I think it sounds a bit too too up in the air, you know? Yeah, I understand. Maybe Derek can think of a name because you're a more down-to-earth guy, you know? Yeah. I'll try. I'll help you. Yeah. So with a king messiah anyway, should be on it, you know? Yeah. I think that it's in the vein, I mean, chapter 5, which is what you sent me. Yeah, I only sent you one chapter because that was the most fun chapter of the book, you know? Yeah, but I can see there's a lot of information. Another chapter there was released on Dr. Bob's journal, chapter 4, you know, reconstructing the TF. But what was wrong with that was that, you know, I didn't take a chance, and the TF sounded very, you know, vacuous, as Dr. Bob said, you know. So I forgot to put in a reason why he was crucified, and I forgot to put in what kind of an organization he had joined, which is a seditious one, like, you know. Yeah, so for those of you watching, Dave has an interesting theory where he is suggesting Christianity, or the term Christiani, is actually a term that was always designated to rebellious groups. It means messianists, right? Which are the anointed, right? These guys who followed a messiah figure, you know? they all came. They all believed that this fellow would rise up from among themselves and lead them against these horrible Romans that were taxing them and starving them. There was famines and everything, and inside, and you know, like, they were downtrodden people, like, and they looked into their own Bibles or whatever they are. They were only scrolls, I suppose, and they thought that, you know, like, God is going to help us and he's going to rise somebody up from among us, and he's going to lead us, and God is going to join with us, and we're going to beat these terrible Romans, you know.
Yeah.
There was actually an incident just before the Jewish War where one of the Romans there, he went to capture the city, and he decided to turn back before the war, and it looked like God had intervened and he made him turn back, you know. So
Wow.
you know, they're very superstitious people, like, so anything like that would rise them, you see, like, God is on our side, like, you know, if they win one battle or whatever, like, you know. Yeah, sure. In the Bible long ago, sure, they had to hold up you know, Moses' hands, or, you know, so that they'd win their battle, and his hands got hurt and they started falling down, so they put 2 sticks underneath him, and it's the battle, you know. So these are very superstitious people, like, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You can ask away your question. Oh, the term Christianity. There was a fella there long ago about Johnson was his name. He wrote a book called Aqua Matter, right? And he was the first fella to suggest that Christianity, Christiani, was only a term by the Romans to mean messianists, you know. And the way the Romans described the messianists, like, they were all superstitious, dangerous, rebellious people, like, you know. They threw them out of Rome, sure, and they were rebelling everywhere, like, you know, because you know, like, they were I suppose they were the lower classes, like, and if there's any bit of trouble, they'd be writing, like you have writing there in America, you know. Yeah, they'd be writing. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. You talk about, and the way I like how you did this is you talk about there being an original testimonium Flavinium. However, you don't take the mythicist position. The mythicists say, well, it's all fabricated. You say, right, no, there was something there, but it was not the Jesus. Yeah.
People, it was overwritten.
Overwritten.
Even like, I mean, when I came into this subject, like, I was reading Carrier and Price, and, you know, and they're very interesting histories, you know. Like, I do love their history, and just that the more I looked into it, you know, you see, I started studying the TF a bit more seriously, like, you know, and there was somebody suggested there, this girl here, she done a great dissertation on it. Her name was Wheelie, and I mean, she even responded to Ken Olsen as well, that there was certain phrases in it that Eusebius would never have used to describe Jesus, because you know, they weren't great descriptions of him, even in the ones that are there. Like, you know, the term for miracle there is strange works in Greek. You know, it wouldn't be your first choice term to describe Jesus. Like, so there's a word here and there stuck inside in that TF that Eusebius would not have used if he made it up from scratch. You know?
Right. And you say that you used examples. You used
I did. I had
other people. Yeah, tons.
And then I started reading Eisler as well. And the reason he is buried, you see, all these people, their scholarship is buried because you know, like, the Christians don't like the fact that Jesus was a rebel, like, you know, and they don't like that fact. So all this and SFG Brandon, like, they try to bury him as well, like, you know. And they called him you know, like, that he was gone cuckoo altogether, they thought, because, you know, he suggested that Jesus was a rebel, and, you know, it doesn't suit the religious, you know. So, you know, these guys are going to get buried, and I've no doubt my book will get buried too.
Hey, that's why.
Out there anyway, you know?
That's why I have this show. You know, I want to bring.
You're the man. You're the man bringing out reality. You know? Yeah.
I try.
Yeah.
I love what you wrote. You bring up Suetonius, Tacitus, Pliny. You talk about all of them. You even use Celsus. You use all of it.
Great. All of it. He's great. You know, these guys that are they were anti-Christians. You know, they wrote commentary against the Christian religion, like, you know. But you see, they were bringing up very uncomfortable truths, and so they had to write books against these people, like, you know. And the reason they had to write books against these people is because they didn't control the books in Rome, and there was a library there. Any pagan could have a look at him, you know, and they could see, oh, the TF, look, he's only a bloody rebel, like, you know. He got crucified for sedition, like, you know. And they couldn't change that. So they had to write these great big books against him. And all that kind of stopped then after Eusebius, because they controlled the books, so they didn't have to write against him anymore.
Yeah, now they are in control.
They are the controller.
Yeah.
But they weren't in control before Eusebius. So they had to write all these refutations, you know? Yeah. And
wow.
Yeah, and these refutations contain so much history that people are not aware of, like, you know. And a lot of people, they tell me the statistics are useless because they're too late. But I told the fella there before that evidence is like a thrown tomato. The evidence gets splattered all over the place, you know. You see, Tacitus, he used Josephus in many places. And there was this, even Carlson, he done a theory there that he also used it for the TF, you know. He used the TF for writing his thing, you know. And what I put in the chapter there was, okay, Tacitus got some of the information off Pliny, like, who are those bloody Christians, like, you know. And but he had a lot more information than Pliny had, you know, and information seemed to match the TF in 4 places. That was so that's how they noticed that, you know.
Yeah.
And all these anti-Christian commentators, they were working off something.
Yes.
And that was the TF.
So you believe that Celsus was actually using the testimonium?
Yeah, he was using that, and so were all the others as well. Like, you know, Tacitus, he didn't know Jesus' name, and the reconstruction I have of the TF does not have Jesus' name, because in the Slavonic, it says everything about Jesus except his name. You know, it has a big whole load, but they didn't seem to know his name. Why is that? Because the Slavonic seems to be working off an earlier exemplar of the Greek. That's before Eusebius, you know. It's destroyed with Christian glass, but there is that one bit preserved that they didn't name Jesus. So in my reconstruction, I says a certain man, you know, and Tacitus, he hasn't a clue what his name is, so he says he was called Christus. And Lucian, he wrote a comedy about the Christians, and he just called them the crucified sophist, because he didn't know his name, like, you know. And they were all working off the TF, I see. And that's why, you know, wow. You see, these guys have that, like, you know. Yeah.
This is interesting. And it comes so close to describing the historical Jesus. I mean,
oh yeah. You see, in Buddhism, there they say, be careful not to go to the source of the stream, because you might like the tiny stream, like, you might like what you find, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, the deeper fellas get into this, maybe they don't like what they find, so they throw the books away or whatever, you know. They don't want to bury into this kind of information, like, you know, especially if you're a Christian or whatever, like, you might want to know. So you pretend that, no, we can't use the TF, we can't reconstruct the TF, because, you know, there's no way that was in it, you know. Yeah. So you hear that, you know, like, I mean, the TF is grand, but you can't use it, you know.
For people who are wondering, the TF is the Testimonium Flavinium. It's the passage where he mentions Jesus, which has obviously been hijacked by Christians.
Oh, well, it was by the time Eusebius. And after, Wheelie was brilliant, because she proved that even after Eusebius, they changed it again. You know, they kept changing that column. And what Wheelie does, she brings it back to what Eusebius originally wrote. And from there, we can take it a bit better, you know. You can get it reconstructed a bit better if you can at least get it back to that, you know. Yeah.
Interesting.
And
so
how you get a pre-Eusebian witness then is there was other scholars, German scholars came up with that, you know. Like Eisler, no, he was brilliant, like, you know. He said that all these anti-Christian polemists, they seem to be working off the original Testimonium Flavium. That's what he said inside in his book, like. And then there was another old German scholar book. that Tacitus worked off it as well, you know. And these are the, and also the Slavonic is a pre-US being in places, but it's been destroyed because, you know, there's so much Christian gloss. How can you get any history out of it? But there is that little piece where they didn't name Jesus in that, you know. So that is the piece that is, and they didn't name him, he was the Christ either inside in the Slavonic as well, you know. So, wow. I mean, like, Christians don't downgrade, you know.
Yeah.
You know, like, they don't downgrade, like, you know. So if it was there from the beginning, it would be in the Slavonic now, you know.
Right.
And Eisler then, he proved that it was Jewish Christians that preserved the Slavonic, you know. So they you know, like in Russia, that it was a Jewish Christian, but they still believed in Jesus as the Messiah. So if that was in it, it would have been in the Slavonic, you know.
Wow. And Dave, you mentioned something that's common for people that I don't think they, let me say this. Why I love what you wrote is you take some of the obvious things we've all known, but you really hammer it hard because, you know, anyone who reads the Apostle of the Acts or the Acts of the Apostles,
it's all just propaganda, like, you know.
But
it's not propaganda. It's why they wrote it is more interesting than what they wrote, you know.
Yeah.
Why did they write this? Why did they write that? Like, you know, like you know, like that is just another ball game altogether. The Acts, you know. Yeah, and it really is very interesting as well. Like, yeah.
I think it's interesting that you have Theodus and you have Judas the Galilean as similar comparative people.
Oh yeah, I have another chapter on that inside my book. All right, like where you see why there was what was his name, Unterbank. He gave me the idea that there was something hiding in behind the TF, you know. Yeah. So I said I'd look into it, and I looked at all the latest scholarship on the TF. All right, and by God, it would blow you away. All right, like, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. I need to read it.
What is hidden, like, you know, that is that's where the most interesting part of it is, like, you know. Yeah,
absolutely.
But, yeah. Next question.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on what's your thoughts about Paul in the book of Acts being equated with the Egyptian? What do you think about that?
Oh, well, you see, that was only a comment. Eisler, he thought that he was the Egyptian, you know, but and then Simon Magnus, they all think something separate. But I don't really have I leave that to Dr. Price because I haven't really looked into that, you know. So, right. But what I would say about it is it shows you that the Jesus movement is classed with all these messianists groups. Like, it's not the fact that Luke got his history wrong about the chronology of Judas the Galilean and Gamaliel. You know, he got some things mixed up, right? It was the fact that Jesus was compared to these other movements, you know, in Acts, and that is very telling. Like, you know, that is their social class. It was Martin Smith noticed that in Jesus the Magician book, you know, that it's not the fact that he mixed up his history, Luke. Like, you know, it's not his history that is interesting. It's how he tells it, you know. It's how he tells it is the interesting part, you know. That he compares the Jesus movement to Judas the Galilean. Like, they didn't get off because God wasn't on their side. God was on our side, so he left us off. But it wasn't that's interesting. It's the fact that he's comparing them to Judas the Galilean.
He said too much.
Yeah, I know he said too much, but it's great that he did, you know?
Yeah, it is. I'm glad he did.
He did, because the clues are in there. The clues are left inside. Like, I mean, Carrier before said that the Gospels and Acts are useless for history. They're not. It's just that we can't read them literally, obviously.
Right.
But it's the clues they give, you know?
Let me ask you one more question, because honestly, there's so much. I need to read your book, the whole thing.
I'll send that. Because that's only a taster, but that was the most fun chapter I wrote about the anti-Christian polemists taking on. But they seem to be working off the TFSC. That's why. That's why it's so interesting. But also at the end of that chapter, then I go on about the Nazareth question, you know. And I think that's all part of the clues as well, because the Nazarenes, they seem to be a messianic group, you know. And I think it's very, it actually, it makes history more likely that Jesus was part of a group that existed already, you know. He didn't start a group, that he was part of he came into a group, you know. And they have to cover up that fact because Jesus was God, like, so he couldn't have just joined, be one of the normal fellas, like, you know. He had to have started everything. History starts from Jesus, according to Christians, you know. But
Right.
no. He was had very little to do with it, with Christianity. Yeah.
I think he probably,
You know?
and maybe you agree with me, that he probably became well-known and famous because the timing in which he came and existed.
That's what history is for, you know. It's to track why Jesus, why not Judas, why not the Egyptian,
right?
You know.
What is your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you see, I suppose you could say that Paul was, he must have been brilliant at, you know, like as a propagandist, you know, and he must have got the abroad, like he must have got that movement going very good, like, you know. He made up some great excuses why Jesus was still the Messiah, even though he obviously wasn't, because he got crucified and Israel was still without a country. He was supposed to restore Israel, and he you know, not only that, but later on, after Paul was dead, and not only did he not restore Israel, but their bloody house got destroyed, you know, the big temple.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that got totally destroyed. So the opposite happened of what he was supposed to deliver, you know. Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, when do you place Jesus in history, and why do you think they picked him? Was there something special that he did or said?
I think that's where history comes into play. Like, I'd say that maybe his movement was the remnant of the Messianists that weren't destroyed. You know, they were all destroyed. All these people were destroyed. And the more successful ones that were for beating the Romans, like Simon Bar Giora, right? They were captured, like, you know. And then there was the Sicarii who held out, you know. He what was his name? Was Lazarus, you know. And of course, Lazarus is risen in the Gospels too, of course. Right. But he was their leader in Masada, you know. And you see, they were destroyed, killed, gone. So there was nobody there to carry on their names, like, because they were dead. But there must have been enough of the Jesus movement. He was earlier on, before the war. And there must have been enough of them in the next generation that survived and went abroad. Some of them had to go abroad, like, you know, when you're in trouble, like, you go abroad. They start up the diaspora. And it's like the diaspora, the descendants of that diaspora are looking back on an old war hero, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And after the Roman war, they wrote about their war hero. And not only that, but the stories of other war heroes got joined in with Jesus, because it's not one story, it's about 10 stories joined into the Gospels, like, you know. I'd say all the other fellas' stories got ended up dished in with Jesus as well, like, you know, and plus all the old Hebrew scriptures as well. Like, I mean, they wrote, they had Jesus doing the exact same miracles as Elijah, Elisha, and all that, like. So there's about 20 stories mashed into one, like. But why he got remembered is just maybe it was his community might have survived the war, like, you know, and the others didn't. And they used the other communities, remnants of the other communities' stories as well, got mashed in as well. You know?
Wow. Yeah, that's what that Dr. Price says, that the John the Baptist movement and followers come into Christianity like they're trying to make them become Christians, which is interesting.
Bob is brilliant, because he's right. He can see through the propaganda. See, you know, like even Steve Mason said it as well, like that. John the Baptist, they might have had nothing to do with the Jesus movement. You know, in Josephus, they had nothing to do with him. Christianity isn't mentioned in the John the Baptist passage, like, you know. So they might have been more popular, and maybe the lads here, like, they wanted all the Baptists to join them as well. So they wrote them into the propaganda as well, like, you know.
Wow. Dang. So I have to make this the last question. Have to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're grand. You're fine.
Why would pagans, non-Israelites, want to follow this guy? Did they paint him in a pretty way and made him not look like this messianic figure by the time pagans start to take notice of this?
Well, that is true. Like Paul did reinterpret. Like at that stage, he was only using Jesus' story. You know, it wasn't the old Jewish story.
Right.
He was using a crucifixion story and changing it. You know, so and he wanted to disassociate with all Jesus' family. He wanted nothing to do with James and all them, like, you know, and he was pretending that he was the head of the organization, you know, all through his letters. Like, it's me, it's nobody else. Like, there was other missionaries beside Paul, and they're mentioned inside in his letters, independent of Paul. Like Rome had nothing to do with Paul. That wasn't started by Paul. Paul only wrote a letter to them, you know. So this movement was being made. It's a very good question you have there, Derek. All right, like, you know, why would the Gentiles be bothered with an old Jewish messianist, you know? But the Jews didn't be bothered with him because he was a failure in life. And the Gentiles, that didn't mean nothing to them. So maybe they followed that easier, you know? And another thing, why Paul didn't talk about Jesus' life, because he says very little about him, is would you talk about a failure? Like, you know, ask yourself that, like, you know, and Paul said that he was resurrected. That's where the success was, you know, that God resurrected him. But during his life, why would he bother talking about his life if he was crucified up on the cross? He obviously failed, like, you know.
Wow. Yeah. Dave, this is, I got to read the rest of the book. Is it going to be published one day?
Yeah, I'm going to give it to Dr. Bob because, you know, like, I get on well with Bob, you know, and I know he's on hard times. And like, I'm a shopkeeper, so I have enough money.
I got to read the rest of this, and everyone watching.
Yeah. Oh, no bother. Yeah. When like, I'm still in the rewrite, you know, of it, and I want to get it right, like, before I put it out there. But that chapter 5 was so much fun. I had to put it on to you. I can give you the rest of the book if you want it, like, you know.
Absolutely,
But I was delighted that you enjoyed it anyway.
I felt like you got so close. Like, I've interviewed Lena Einhorn, and you saw the interview.
Yeah. She's on the right track. You know.
Yeah, she's very brilliant. Yeah.
Like, I'll tell you one thing. Even Carrier said that if there was a historical Jesus, Lena was on the right track. Like, and she was. But the only reason Jesus sounds like the Egyptian is because he was one of them. Like, he was one of those messianic rebels. He actually sounds like them all, not just one. And I have a whole chapter on that as well, where he sounds like, I put in about 5 or 6 of them, and they all sound like, fuck, that could be Jesus, you know? So, I mean, like, you know, like, that's the reason he sounds like him, because he was one of them, you see. Yeah.
Wow. Dave, thank you. Do you put any of your information out there if people want to contact you, or?
Well, I just on the group, really. I just write. It's only a hobby, you know. I did do a history degree, so that's why I'm able to study it a bit better than maybe the other Josephs, like, you know. Yeah. Because I'm only a Joseph myself, like, but I did actually get a degree in history, so I do understand how to read properly, like, you know. Yeah. And, and get it out there, like, you know. But the group that I joined, you know, the historical Jesus group, like, they are very helpful guys in there, like, you know, and whenever I put out an idea, like, it bounces off them and they bounce it back. And, you know, like, I mean, that Christianity thing, there was a fella in that group, De'Aaron Hill, he told me there that Johnson said, that only means Jewish messianists. Look, read this book here. Like, I mean, Johnson had that bit figured out years ago, like, but all this is buried, you see, because anything that makes Jesus look like a rebel, like, is obviously going to be buried, like, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not going to. They're hoping it won't be resurrected, but we will do it, Derek.
Look, everyone watching, he's in the Facebook group. He's he's in a couple different groups: Mythical Jesus versus Historical, and then
the Methodist group as well. Like, you know, I'm admin in a couple of groups because I like to see both sides, you know.
Yes.
And for a while there, I was a Methodist because, you know, like, the Christian history is all fake, like, you know. And, you know, like I said, geez, no, that didn't happen at all, like, you know. This fella didn't walk or whatever, you know, all these silly stories, like, you know. And, Jesus, no, that didn't happen at all. But then, as you dig deeper and deeper, you say, Jesus, it's something, like, you know, the ideas bounce around, like, and eventually I've come to the conclusion that he was a rebel, like, you know? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
You
go
can
join it.
Now.
Yeah, go into the description. You guys can join both of the Facebook groups. You guys can, you know, when you go in the group, you can tag Dave, say thank you for, you know, the show. Dave's in Ireland, so it's obvious he has an accent. But if you guys get a hold of his material, which will be launched on the Journal of Higher Criticism with Dr. Price at some point, you guys need to get the book and check it out. I'm telling you, Chapter 5. I've only read Chapter 5, and it's like, can I say this? Dave takes a lot of time pointing out things, like he goes to like Celsus. Celsus is quoting. He'll make an argument assuming Jesus is followed by tax collectors and sailors, right? And you're like, where did this come from? Because it doesn't come from the Gospels. And Origen is arguing back, which is where we get our evidence of some of this stuff. And he's like, oh, he obviously hasn't read our gospel. But what is Celsus reading? And is Celsus reading something from the Testimonium Flavinium? And he goes to make an argument that there's more evidence about this guy than what we have in our New Testament. There's a lot more evidence. And that
Martin Smith did put it very well. He said that we were at the disadvantage of his propagandists, you know, or his, you know, the people that are on his side. That's the only side of the story we have, like. But there are clues out there from the other side, like, you know. Yeah.
From the rebels.
And the Roman side is very interesting, you know, like they view them like Al-Qaeda or something like that, you know. They're like in all their letters they describe the Christianity as superstitious, dangerous, rebellious, you know, inside their letters, like, you know, and you know, like you know that, and they're not really talking about Christians, like they were only just talking about Messianists in general, and they were the crowd that caused so much trouble in the Jewish-Roman war, like, you know. That's why they wrecked the temple, because they reckoned that the temple was driving them on to become like their scriptures, to come over and take on the Romans, like, you know, that is giving them too much spirit to fight the Romans, you know, and they're costing the Romans a lot of money too, I suppose. Yeah.
Interesting.
It was a vicious war. It was a vicious war, like, you know, because, you know, like the Jews were fighting like as if they were going to live right through anything that they throw at them, like, you know. Yeah. Because they thought God was fighting with them.
You're right. They are like the Al-Qaeda. That sounds like the Al-Qaeda. Yeah. There was.
They thought God was fighting with them, like, and we're going to win it, no matter if we have, no matter how much the Romans have, like, you know. We're going to win this. The Romans had to throw in loads of soldiers in there, like, you know. It cost them a pile of money, like the Romans. But anyway, that's it.
Well, thank you so much, David. Hey, I hope you can do this again sometime, and we can definitely chat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No bother. Yeah. Okay. See
Thank
you. Bye.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.
If you see where the placement of the TF is, right, you know, the column before it, you know, like, I mean, all the Jews' throats got slit and they got killed. They were like, the people up in Northern Ireland, they were doing an innocent, well, they mightn't be innocent, but they were unarmed protest. And they started shooting at them. It caused a 30-year war up there, you know. There was a 30-year war by the IRA up in Northern Ireland because of that. And before Jesus' column, you know, there was a similar incident happened where the innocent, well, I maybe I shouldn't use the word innocent, like, but Jews were protesting, you know, and they weren't armed. And Pilate got his soldiers to dress up as ordinary people in among them and started clubbing them and killing them. And I mean, like, that would drive anyone daft, like, you know. So when Jesus went up, there could have been a mob there for him to lead, you know. He could have been a charismatic character, and whatever Galileans he brought up with him, like, you know, the Judeans could have joined in with him, And myself and Stephen Nielsen were looking at the Greek of the TF, you know, and at one stage it said, and you noticed this as well, you told me this as well, that all the Greeks and all the Jews were following Jesus, and that sounded very you know, like Paul's epistles, and not like Josephus, like. And you are correct, you know. If you swapped out the word Greeks with Galileans, you could have Jesus leading a double movement like the Jews and the Galileans at Passover. At Passover is a very reactionary time rather than an organized time, you know. Mm-hmm. And something happened at that time, and he got arrested and crucified. And he wasn't crucified alone, so he wasn't a single man that was crucified. There was Mark puts 3 crucified because 3 is a big number with Mark, like, but there could have been a lot more crucified there with him. It could be a lot out of his group, you know. And Kelsis then says, what's the difference between the 2 fellas crucified with Jesus and Jesus? There's no fucking difference there, he said, like, you know, that they were robbers, and robbers in Josephus means brigands, you know. That's a term for brigands, like, you know. So, you know, just 2 more pointers there for you, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's
thank you.
Chapter 4. That's in my chapter 4. Actually, I must send out the rest of the book to you, but I thought chapter 5 was just a very entertaining chapter. So
it
that's
is.
Why
It really is. I gotta get these people have got to read it.
Yeah, it's very entertaining. I enjoy that chapter, I must say. Like, whereas the chapter before, the TF is very technical and it goes into the Greek, and you know, like the fellas could get lost reading that chapter, like. But you had to lay the groundwork for chapter 5, like, you know.
Yeah.
So you had to put down and you had 3 more chapters before the TF as well, because you have to lay down the groundwork, because Christianity wasn't born in a bubble; it came from somewhere, and you had to put down all that background, like, you know, and what is Messianism. You have to understand it very, very, very well, like, you know, to understand what drove these people, like, you know.
Wow.
Anyway. Okay, Derek.
Thank you.